Men Talk Ubuntu podcast. We're really excited to be here. Have you join us on this podcast and the conversation we're going to have today? Our guest this episode is Tony Thompson, an amazing, honourable, courageous black gentleman of society, a father, a husband, a man of God who continues to wear many professional hats, from being a professional teacher, horticulturist, national bus operator, fictional children's book author, and many more. He has an amazing story to share with us. And when I say amazing, I mean the man's story is truly inspirational to all of us, encouraging us to talk and share our feelings and emotion. He is living proof that the distance between you and everything you're yet to become is in the amount of action you take in finding yourself. Tony, it's a pleasure to have you here. Please tell us your story and your journey.
Right. Thank you for having me. And basically, I was raised in a children's home. I spent the first 14 years of my life in a children's home. The first 2 years was in a private babies' home in Ongar, Essex, and it was a private babies' home. And basically, it was ran for profit, and it got raided by the police and the social services. And then I was asked to, basically that there was no choice in those days but to put me in a residential children's home, or known as an orphanage. And I was there until I was 14. Then I went to live with my mother and stepfather, and there I sort of stayed there for a while until I got old enough. I hadn't really sort of, to be honest, really bonded with my mother or my stepfather. It was very difficult years living with them. I could say I was more happy in the children's home than I was in the living with my mother and stepfather. When I became of age where I could sort of basically look after myself, I went to live with some friends, and these friends, they were similar age to me, and they were lovely. Mother and father were hardworking Jamaicans that came over in the Windrush. Mr. Mayu, who sadly passed away recently, he worked for British Rail, and Mrs. Mayu, his wife, she was a hospital auxiliary nurse, and they both worked hard. And I went to live with them and their 3 boys. They've got older daughters, but they've all left the home by then. Anyway, I lived with them for about a few years until I got my own sort of council apartment in Battersea, South London. And there, I think that's when I started to discover myself mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and sexually. And then I realized that I had mental issues, in terms of how you think about yourself, what you feel about yourself. And then I started to discover my sexuality, and that was a whole issue because, I was sort of brought up in the church, and so I kept a lot of those feelings within, and I struggled emotionally, mentally, even though I was still attending church, but I was still struggling. So there was all these different conflicts going on within me, but it wasn't until I sort of I became a part of a sort of like a self-help group, in the sense of trying to come to terms with who I am and what when I say come to terms with who I am, like emotionally, mentally, and I suppose I started to get more of a understanding of who I was and why the way I was, and I mean, I'm still discovering myself in that sense. I don't feel that I've got there, and I, it's a long journey, isn't it? It's that you just have to sort of navigate your way through a lot of these things. And I eventually I found a church that where there was people my own age group. They'd come out of churches where they was very religious and very legalistic, and there was a difference, because I think there's a difference between being religious and being spiritual. And joining this church, I met my wife, Kathleen, and but I was very open with her. I said, this is where I'm coming from, and we journeyed together in that, and I was trained to be a teacher then, and that was quite difficult, because I was bus driving as well, and that's how I got my license, because I was trying to supplement my income being a full-time older student, as they call a mature student. And we got married. We settled in Croydon, but I got my first job was in Grays, Essex, and as an NQT, I was commuting from Croydon to Grays until eventually it got too much. So we eventually moved to Grays. We got a house, and I taught in Grays for about 3 years, and then I got a job as a teacher of a PRU. I don't know if you've heard of them, like pupil referral units for children that have got emotional behavioural problems. And I enjoyed that, because I suppose I could, I knew where they were coming from, because I came from a similar sort of, sort of disturbed background, as you could say. And then we moved from Grays to Chelmsford, and I was still working Grays, and then I managed to get another job in Chelmsford. So that's it in a nutshell. But there's a lot in between, because I had, obviously I've had my ups and downs in terms of my marriage, and but we've persevered, and we struggled through, and I just feel that you just have to. Perseverance is quite a I don't know how you can put it. It's you have to really. I suppose with the help of with God, and I'm not saying that in a religious sense, but in a spiritual sense, that helped me. And yes, I've seen therapists in the past, psychotherapists, and I think that's really helped. That has really helped me come into terms with who I am. But there have been, if I reflect back to my childhood, and back in the children's home, I was fortunate that I had some lovely people, and particularly one lady who just, she's always been there for me, and I regard her as my mother, really, because she's always been there for me. Her name's Jill Snowlin, and she lives in Ipswich, and my boys now call her grandma. Well, they call her Grandma Ipswich because she lives in Ipswich, and she's just been a real good, solid rock behind me. I mean, because my relationship with my biological mother has always been up and down. My biological mother, is very, very religious, to the sense that she was almost embarrassed by me, because when she came over from Jamaica, she was only 18, she was pregnant, and she wasn't married. And in those days, it was all, looked upon. So she was influenced very heavily by her mother and her sister, who were living over here in the UK. They came over first, and they sort of had a very strong influence on her, because they're very religious as well, and told her to, put the child away, because it's, as the Italians would say, you bring shame upon the family, But it was something that it's something that I've also struggled with, with rejection. Rejection is a very feeling rejection and struggling with rejection, I think, is one of our biggest, one of our biggest things that I think, even as Black men, we struggle with rejection in terms of, like, it's funny, I was looking at something the other day, and this guy said, is my existence an issue to you? And I thought, and I used that as a chapter in a book that I'm writing now. Is and that opens up such a big can of worms in terms of how we feel about ourselves, how other people see us, how we see ourselves. There's just so much, but feel free to ask me anything.
Thank you. Yeah, you just really captivated us with a lot of your story and your journey. Thank you very much, Tony. And that goes beautifully into our topic for today. And so today, Men Talk, what we're talking about is owning your story. But first, on a scale of 1 to 10, Tony, where are you mentally, and why?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say I'm about 6, because I suppose this pandemic hasn't helped, in a sense, because it makes you look at yourself a lot more, and especially, right, I live with my family, and I live with my wife and my son, because my eldest son is at university. You still have issues to deal with in terms of loneliness, significance, because this pandemic sort of brought on the issue, because I'm furloughed at the moment, and you start to feel, well, am I really significant? And and then, because you're so used to going out to work, and then it's made me also feel about people. What about the people that are in a 1-bedroom flat and you've got 3 kids, or so that the question you asked, Ray, a really good question, is multifaceted, really, because there's just so many other issues in terms of, I'm still dealing with the issue with my mum, in terms of how my biological mum, I think that's going to be a continuous thing until I probably I'm in my grave, is rejection, and especially rejection from your parents. I think that is an issue that, I mean, I think a lot of people deal with, and particularly Black men, especially rejection from their father. And even though I never had a father, and that rejection can come in all sorts of forms, whether you're just emotionally ignored, or because your father could be present but still ignore you in terms of not connecting with you. And when I say connecting with you emotionally and mentally, and there's just, it's, I suppose, in a way, it sort of opens up quite a can of worms, in the sense of where we are mentally, and then also what's recently been happening with the Black Lives Matter, that it's, I think, and how we are perceived, because every day even when I go out and I'm just at the shops, the way people look at you, the way they still see us as a threat. They still see you, the color of your skin. And I suppose that in some sense that's sort of made me, angry. There's just so much that you have to contend with, and yeah. So, don't get me started on. Yes, I just feel a lot of the time we're just racially profiled, and it's just, and that can have an effect on you mentally and emotionally, because it can make you feel insignificant. It can make you feel, there's just so many effects it can have on you, and then you're also dealing with your own personal feelings of, your own emotional makeup, your own sexual makeup. So you've got all these things going in your head that you're contending with. That is just, I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's just,
I think you certainly are, Tony. And I think, like Ray said before, it's just captivating to really hear you speak about all of these different things, and the way you're sharing some of the ideas with what's going on right now. I'm sure a lot of people are experiencing it, and it's no point in saying it's seasons. Like, we're always in this period of transition for most of us. I'm really intrigued by potentially the way you've spoken about some of this idea about rejection and searching for purpose and meaning. There's two things I'd like to try and do. One thing is also, I can see why you say you're at a 6, because initially when you said you're at a 6, I was a little concerned, but I can understand why now that you've given a bit more context to it. I'd be curious, maybe, to use the journey you described has maybe a layout for our discussion. So if you were to go back to that younger you who was feeling, I don't know how you felt initially when you were in the children's home, and how you felt once you're being forced from the children's home to live with your biological parents, and to feel like you were happier in the children's home. I don't know what, on a scale of 1 to 10, where that young man would have placed himself mentally. And I ask that because there are probably a lot of young men right now who might be facing that, or as the summer of 2021 will come to pass, they're going to be in that phase of transition of, you mentioned you've shamed the family Some of them, it might be to do with their grades. Some of them, it might be to do with the choices that they've got coming next. And just a lot of us as well has perhaps lockdown eases off. And we're now starting to think what we really want to do, because like you said, there's been a lot of introspection. We've had a lot of time to think,
Yeah, yeah,
more time than we would like, perhaps. And we might be struggling with, now the world is opening back up, and now I have to deal with whether I want to continue with the way things were or whether I'm going to make a change. So the first
yeah.
thing is, of course, where on a scale of 1 to 10 would you say that that young man was? And thinking back to that time, is there any advice that you would have wanted to give that young man?
Yeah, I would. The first thing, on a scale of 1 to 10, I suppose I would have been a 9, because I was in a secure institutional environment. But I was fortunate to have good people that who worked in the orphanage that were really good, were really good people, who were out for my interests. And so in that sense, and the advice I would try to give him is, if I was to be talking to my younger self, was to try and be more secure, and not to. I was very needy at that age, and but I was, and that neediness was obviously fed because of the rejection that I felt from my mother, even though I suppose at that age I wasn't aware of it, because I was that was the world I knew, and that was the world I was secure in. And but when I went to live with my biological mother, and my stepfather, that was just such a transition, and it was a culture shock, because I was predominantly brought up in a white environment, with the people that were raising me were white, and so they wouldn't have, and in those days didn't know how to relate. They had no knowledge of black people, or of their food, their culture, how we feel and how we think. So I was in one sense, so I thought like a white person, and it was not until I went. So the positive side of it was when I went to live with my mother. I realised that I'm black, and even though I had to get used to the food, and I went to a black school, Tulse Hill School, which was that was right in Brixton. So most of the kids that went to the school were black, and it was just, so that culture shock, coming to face with my own culture. So I had that to deal with. But then going back at the home, to answer your question, Shai, was that I just needed to be secure. And even though I was in a secure environment, I was still very insecure and very needy, because I wasn't being nurtured by, my real mother. And well, I don't know of my father. My mother's told me stories about my father, and she said that one minute she said she was in love with him, and now she's trying to say that she was raped by him. So that's caused another issue. But I know my answer might seem muddled, but if I was to talk to another young man who's in a home, or who's being cared for by foster carers, I'd want him to try and get in touch with himself, in terms of not to reject therapy, not to reject anything, where try and get a role model, or someone who could who you could look up to, particularly a black male role model who's going to give him a good, positive, masculine affirmation. There'd be so much that I would want to, like nurture to him, so that he doesn't sort of go down the path of, criminality or anything where he feels that he's going to get attention, love, and because a lot of the young black guys now, they're getting into it, and I'm not saying all, because I think the media exaggerates it, but a lot of them are into the gang life because that's their family, that's their, who they relate to and who they can connect with, and that, that's why I feel a lot of them because a lot of them, you'll find a lot of them are, they don't have a good positive male role model in their lives. A lot of them are brought up by single women who are struggling and trying to, just trying to find a way of bringing them up the best way they know, and it becomes a vicious circle. So that's a real deep question, and I don't know if I can answer it fully, but I think that's the advice I would give. So I don't know if I've answered that, Shai, but yeah.
Amazing. I mean, like everything you're saying and how you're explaining it, even what you just said, how, multi-dimensional your experience has been and the transition you've gone through. And one thing I want to try and kind of hone in on is your transition from going from that 9 space when you're in that home to you being with, your biological mother, and more importantly, what that experience was like. If we can just get a bit more understanding of what the whole context of, how your feeling was, the relationships that was in that household, because again, that wasn't just a house, it also became your new home now, and that also brought a lot of different struggle from, again, you've got the culture, the culture struggles, you've got the emotional safety, you've also got the relationship you have with your mother, and not having that affection and love that you're most probably not aware of at that age, but it's, at the same time you can feel something's not right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, I can look back to that clearly. Actually, I remember when because I had a social worker, because each child in the orphanage was assigned a social worker, and the social service at that time felt it's time for me to go and live with my mother. I had been going on the odd weekend because I was living in Woodford Bridge, that's where the orphanage was, and I was going from the age of 12, I was travelling from on the outskirts of East London to South London to spend the weekends with my mum and my stepfather. And after a couple of years of doing that, and it wasn't every weekend, it was sort of like every other weekend, and, anyway, to make a long story short, when I got to the age of 14, they felt that it was time for me to, they felt it was the right time for me to go and live with my mother and stepfather, because there was there wasn't a reason for me to stay in the home anymore, because they felt, I suppose, that they was using it as a familiarity sort of, you know, it was one of their methods of trying to get children back into their family unit. So, and the couple that were looking after me in the children's home had retired, but the lady that had been constantly in my life, Jill Snowlin, she had moved to Ipswich. So when I eventually did move into my home with my mother, at first it was really, I couldn't sleep. I would rock myself to sleep because I was really mentally and emotionally disturbed, to the point where it concerned my stepfather, which was surprising because he didn't really show any sort of affection or love to me. Even, you know, my mother was, because of her strict religious ways, I think she was more concerned about image rather than nurturing this disturbed 14-year-old boy. And so I was told to change my name, because my name on my birth certificate was Leroy Anthony Johnson Gale. And when I went to live with my mother, I was always known as Tony anyway, because they'd always I was always known by my middle name. And even though my mother called me Anthony, but all my friends and people who I got to know just called me Tony, because, you know, they shortened the name. Anyway, so when I eventually was living there, I was always trying to get my mother's approval, and always doing things, and because I was scared of her in the sense because I didn't know her, and I just saw her as this sort of authoritative, because she comes across as very authoritative, very sort of not maternal, and so I was always afraid of her. And my stepfather was always on my back about things which bugged him, and, you know, like as soon as I got up in the morning, you know, have you washed out your mold? You know, that's the first thing he would ask me, rather than, oh, how are you? Did you sleep well? You know, first thing he'd ask me is, have you washed out your mold? And, you know, because he was, like, you could say, the typical stereotypical black man that doesn't know how to relate to their kids.
I think that's a common thing with the older generation, or
yeah.
was.
Yeah, that sort of generation, you know, and you just, you know, I remember I was about 16 once, and I said to him, and at that time I called him Dad, and I said, Dad, do you love me? You know, what are you talking about? You know, just wash the dishes, man. You know, and, you know, don't talk to me about this foolishness. You know, and it was, you know, so it wasn't, there was no sort of, like, because I say to my kids now, you know, I love you, son, and I love you, Josh, to the point where Josh has said, well, you know, why are you saying that? I know you love me, you know. and I'm not afraid to hug him or kiss him, and the same with Daniel, you know. But yeah, so it was just that. It was just, I couldn't be myself, and I just felt estranged with my mother, estranged with my stepmother, and it was. But I felt, fortunately, you know, I started to make friends in church, and it's with that family who I eventually went to live with, who were, yeah, they were old school, but they were new school in the sense that, you know, you, Mr. and Mrs. May, they were very, they broke the mold in that sense. You know, you could go and talk to them, you could, you know, you could go and hug them, you could kiss them, you know, that it was, and yet they were old school in the terms of like discipline, you know, there's some things you wouldn't dare say to Mrs. May because she was the disciplinarian, you know. She would chase you around the room with a broom if you dare back chat her, you know. It was that sort. But yeah, she was a loving woman, you know. And but going back to that sort of the culture shock, living with my mother and my stepfather, yeah, it was very difficult, very difficult. And I could say that I was very unhappy. Yeah. I don't know if that's answered the question. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow. Just wow, man. There's so much there that I feel like, firstly, it's just to say I'm really proud of you and how far you've come and how you spoke about perseverance earlier on, and that's something that is coming through. I suppose when life keeps making you feel like you have to keep persevering, you might not appreciate how much you've persevered through because it's sort of ongoing. But there is so much there. And even that contrast of being able to see that currently with all you have, with the loving family, with how far you've progressed and all these things, you feel like you're at a 6. And when you look back, then you'd say that young man was at a 9. And it is to some extent that resilience that young people have, resiliency that young people have, and that different outlook. It's almost like life keeps beating us up for so long. The number is usually going to go down. The friend, you say you moved in with Mr. and Mrs. Mayhew, was it?
Mayhew, yeah.
Mayhew. Was that, you said, through a friend initially?
Yeah, well, because Andrew Mayhew, I could class him as my best friend now,
Yeah.
And he's married. His mother, well, I call her our mother really. Mrs. May, she died in October 8 years ago. Yeah, it was 8 years ago. Yeah, and then Mr. May died a couple of months ago. He was 94. Mrs. May was in her 80s when she died. But it's that generation that's gone now. So yeah, went to live with them, and just because Andrew's around my age group, so is Carlton, who it's funny because when Carlton is the same age as me, and we were more friends. But Carlton lives in America now. He lives in California with his wife, and he's got 3 boys. And they've got an older brother, Tony Mayhew, and 2 older sisters, Sadie and Ika. But yeah, but they were they're a good, strong family. But like all families, you have your issues and your ups and your downs. But, yeah.
I'm wondering what the conversation was like as well, because if you're currently, say at the time, with your mother and father-in-law or stepfather, sorry, and you then have a conversation with your friend Andrew, and now you're going to move into their home for a period before you sort of start moving on to the next phase of your life. It's what was the kind of conversation like? I don't know, with your mom or with the Mayhews, like when you turn up, hey, can I crash for a while? Like, how does that
good
go?
question. Yeah. I remember the day. It was in the summer. I was in my late teens, I was in my 20s, and it got to a point where I was getting too big to be beaten, you know, because my stepfather would, you know, he couldn't, and because he knows that I would have all that repressed anger.
Ready to unleash.
Yeah, we know when we sense danger.
Yeah. So, and I just remember saying to my mother that I'm going to go and live with the Mayhews. I know it upset her, but she knew there was nothing that she could say or do that would stop me. And I remember going that afternoon to Mrs. Mayhew and saying, "Is it all right if I stay here for a while?" And she was happy because she treated me like one of her own, and she was happy. But she said, "Well, I have to ask." She called him Carpy. That was his nickname. "I have to ask Carpy, and then I'll let you know." You know, and so that evening I came. She said, "Well, Mr. Mayor said it's all right," and she said, "This is, you know, these are the rules of the house, blah blah blah." But I'd already sort of really knew because I was spending a lot of time there anyway, and yeah, and I just got my stuff, and I didn't have much stuff. It was just clothes and a few belongings, and then I yeah, moved in with the Mayhews. And it was just, and where was I? I wasn't working at the time. I was unemployed, but and it was just, but I had a little part-time job, sorry, at Sainsbury's, and because at that time I was thinking of becoming a youth worker, and I was doing an access course, but that fell through. But I was trying to sort of figure out where am I going to go in life, what am I going to do, you know, and how am I going to, what is really my, I suppose you could call it a calling, or in terms of jobs and things like that. So, but I suppose with the Mayhews, it was more, I think, if looking back on it now, they gave me a sort of a good mental and emotional bedrock, you know, as to where I'm gonna go in life. And I think that's a very important thing. Is wherever you are, whoever you are, you just need to try and get that emotional and mental and even spiritual bedrock, and try and discover who you are and where you want to go, you know? Yeah.
That's beautiful. I feel like that's definitely what comes next right now. I think you talk us through some of those mental, emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual. We go through that. And I think before I hand over to you to carry on, or ready to jump in there, what's also, I think, come to mind for me is this idea of, for someone listening, they might need to have a conversation with their child or with the person who's in the house, with some of the things you've described, like not being able to fall asleep. And it takes even your stepfather, who wasn't the most connected to you, seeing that. It feels like that's definitely something to consider. Just because someone's in the home and it's your roof, your rules, we've got the cliche of you're not their friend, you're their parent and everything. Sometimes, yes, that way could work, but there might need to be a conversation that just needs to be had with, are you okay? How did you sleep? I think that was such a powerful, simple thing there. Like, you talked about being a needy kid, but it's like, it's not really. It's like, I wake up, I just want someone to ask me if I'm okay, not just, have you washed your mouth out? You know, like, just, am I okay? But you can see how someone can become needy because you're not getting any of this. So firstly, it's just that I feel like, yeah, for someone listening, either you need to let somebody in the house know that we should have a conversation, or hopefully this is a parent listening as well, and maybe it's time to just have a quick conversation, a quick check if everyone's okay. Or even if you're not a parent, just ask the other person in the house how they're doing. So I thought that was really, really important, really key. And the second thing I think that was really just phenomenal for me is often our communities, like you hinted at earlier as well, are painted in one way, in a very negative way. And here we have this just lovely example of compassion, of caring, of embracing someone and treating them like your own. This it goes to the core. A lot of our guests have said it, where we take each other like family. Like, you've been there so often, and they open their home to you, and you're there for a couple of years. You're sorting yourself out. It gave you this space. Like, that's not spoken about as much when it comes to our community. So I thank you especially for just highlighting that happens. It wasn't adoption papers were signed. It was just come through, and this is your home. And it goes to that thing, when they call you son, like they mean son. And when you say this was now Grandma Ipswich, this was really Grandma Ipswich, you know?
Yeah, you're right.
So that was amazing. And so I wanted to highlight those because they really stood out for me. And it's brought us to a beautiful place where you can now talk about the psychological, mental, spiritual, emotional growth and exploration that came after. But sorry.
I was just gonna add that, I think you even though you've gone through a lot of struggle, a lot of different homes, and essentially an emotional roller coaster, like no other. And like what Shai said previously, proud and do commend you of how you're owning your story, and it's just so powerful to hear, and it brings so much joy hearing your story. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Mayhews for opening their arms to you and being that family that you most probably didn't even realize, but it's what you needed. It was your home. And I think even the other day when we actually spoke on the phone, how even though it was the first time we spoke on the phone, it was like we knew each other for a long time. We were so relaxed and open. We had that connection, and it kind of comes back to the whole community as Black people. We're so divided, and that's because of all sorts of issues and stigmas and mental problems that we all have, that are also associated with cultures, religion. And that's most probably why your mother and your stepfather were that way. For instance, that kind of generation, especially the men, it was also seen that men had to have this masculinity. You don't show your feelings whatsoever. You're a man. And
it was a false masculinity.
definitely. And without even realizing, that whole masculinity stems from when as soon as we're born. And I use this example in a lot of conversations I have with a lot of people, and I say that if you have a girl and a boy, both the same age, let's say for instance they're toddlers, they fall down, they hurt themselves really badly. To the girl, you're going to say, it's okay, cry, show your emotions. To the boy, you're going to say, come on, big boys don't cry, man up, man up. So without even realizing in society is that we're programming the boys to not be expressive in their feelings and their emotions, without even realizing what the long-term impact and effect is going to be in the future. And then it kind of, you fast forward to when you're a man and you realize, wait, something's not wrong. All these things I've been feeling have been erupting, or I've been brushing it under the carpet and tripping over it over and over again. But now it's time to kind of lift up the carpet, pick up the pieces, make sense of it. And, the first stage is identifying it, embracing it, and, you know, owning it, as I said previously. And like going to back to what you said about this transition of where we've come to now in your teenage years, you had the ability to find your who you was, your identity, your mental health. You started to identify these things. So essentially, even though you were tripping over the carpet, you managed to, oh, you know, lift up the carpet and find all these different pieces to find out who you are and build who you are, essentially. And I think the strongest people are the people that win battles that no one knows about. Just like, you know, the different battles that you've been through. So I'm essentially I'm really intrigued to kind of find out how you more or less kind of found your, or put you those pieces all together, and how you found everything in terms of your identity, in terms of your mental health, as you mentioned previously, your sexuality, and, you know, all of that really.
Yeah. That's a really good question, very deep question. And one of the things that I've started to really, in my sort of like mid-20s, I started to become interested in counseling, well, being counseled, and psychotherapy. And it was through a sort of like a self-help group. It was sort of like a men's group that I started to explore. And then I came across a psychotherapist, because myself and Andrew Mayu, we used to, when I eventually moved out from the Mayers and I got my own apartment, we used to ring each other every morning and just see how each other is and connect with each other. And one of the questions that Andrew asked me, he said, have you ever thought of seeing a counsellor, because a psychotherapist? And it never dawned on me, you know. And so I thought, yeah, why not? And I looked up in a magazine, because in those days you didn't have Google, because Google came out in the mid-90s, didn't it? And so I looked up, it was a GQ magazine, actually, you know, Gentleman's Quarterly, you know, that glossy magazine. And I looked through it and I looked back, and there was a psychotherapist, and I went along to him. And yes, he really sort of started to open up my eyes, and this other group that I was going to opened up my eyes in terms of self-discovery, and why I was reacting to certain things, because I used to have a real sort of hatred towards women, and I could say deep down, on the surface you wouldn't see that, but because of the rejection I felt from my mother, and you know, because they say babies feel that rejection even in the womb, if it's not wanted, it will feel that rejection. And so I used to project that rejection onto women, sometimes even before I met them. So I was very sort of antagonistic towards women, because I just felt let down by women, because I was let down by the most important woman in my life, which was my mother. So going back to what you were saying, is that not shying away from going to see a counsellor, and that sort of like opened up a lot of things for me. And that's where I've always been interested in self-discovery in that sense, because and I know it leaves you vulnerable, but I think sometimes that vulnerability, you need that, because it just I think it helps you move further on. Because if you're not vulnerable, if you're not open to someone trying to piece these jigsaws together for you, not that they're trying to direct you and let you think about it. I think you become immobile, and then you get so set in your own ways. And I think you just have to be sort of open to talk, open to having someone, just it's being open to having, how can you put it, open to talking, and sharing your deep down emotional and mental feelings of how you feel about people, about how you've been treated, and how you perceive things. There's just so much, really, isn't it? It's just, it's not, you can't, as you navigate through life, and like, even with me coming across mentor Ubuntu, I think it's so useful in the sense that you finally find someone who you can identify with. And we've all got different stories, and we've all got different, but there's a similarity in the sense that we need to identify with each other and just relate with each other, and just like, well, yeah, I've been feeling that way. Like, I think it was, well, both of you, Ray and Shai, you both said that, the traditional sort of black masculine image of, we don't cry and we don't share our feelings, we don't, that kind of foolishness, how, especially the older generation, the way they react to that sort of thing. But when really deep down you're crying out for identity, you're crying out for someone to empathize with, so when I was in my 20s, I was open to, counseling and being counseled to, because I just wanted to know why I was being the way I was being.
Powerful. I think it's a key message when we hit those points, which we genuinely go, I don't have the answers, and the way I've been doing things just hasn't been working. It's at that point when we're willing and ready to reach out that I think such services become invaluable to us. And the way that you've expressed the idea as being perhaps like as being a jigsaw piece, which life kind of does feel like that. You only find some of the pieces and then they make sense as you're going along, but you don't know off this initially what it's all going to look like. So it's quite a challenging piece or puzzle to put together. And the way I could see it was as you were speaking to the counselor and just navigating your way through life, you were finding all of these different pieces. And I'm curious to hear which pieces you'd perhaps thrown away that came back out during those sessions, or which pieces, as you were talking, came out and started to form a part of your life there onwards?
That's a good question, because when I first met Kathleen, and it's funny, we were talking about it this morning, myself and Kathleen. She said, "Do you believe in conversion therapy?" And I'll be honest, I don't. And I believe in discovering yourself and who you are, and I also believe in that psychologically and emotionally, what has happened in our childhood has made us what we are today. And yeah, and then in terms of, you know, the way we react to things, but going back to answer your question directly, when I first met Kathleen, before I met her, I was exploring my sexuality, and I was going to clubs. I was going to areas where you shouldn't. Well, I'd not say you shouldn't, but you know, I was exploring my sexuality, and I became quite promiscuous in the sense of getting involved in a lot of sexual activity. But the turning point was when I was working for a company called Securicor then, as it was known then, and I was delivering. And every now and then I used to go into, there's a church at the top of Regent Street, and it's called All Souls Church. And you could go in there and just sit there and think, meditate, you know. But anyway, I don't want to go down that road. But and when Kathleen and I first started sort of seeing each other, I gave her a book, and it was a book which it was basically it was about coming out of that sort of lifestyle as a person, you know, and trying to come in touch with who you are and what. And sometimes I as I said earlier, I believe that there are reasons why we become who we are because of our childhood. Anyway, to make a long story short, and I gave her that book, and she read it, and she went to a friend, and she just cried because she thought, "What am I getting into?" You know. And anyway, we've navigated. We've had our ups and downs, and we've had our struggles, but I think with God's help, we've persevered. We've persevered through, and I think there are some, particularly black guys, that are out there who are struggling mentally, emotionally, and if they, you know, and a lot of guys, particularly black guys, they end up taking their own life because they don't want to deal with that, and because of, you know, the shame, the embarrassment, you know, there's all sorts of things that could that could what they're going through, and I just want them to feel that, you know, it's okay to just obviously share in a safe environment, and you know, it's okay to have those feelings, but at times it can be really hard, and but I just don't want other people to go through that emotional and mental and sexual struggle without, and then keeping it to themselves and not knowing where to go to or who to look to, and then eventually doing something, you know, that could be critical to themselves and to their family and friends, because a lot of people have ended their lives because they can't live with it, and it's not just a sexual thing, but it can be a mental thing, it can be emotional thing, so yeah. I hope I've covered that. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, everything you're saying is just, so insightful, and really appreciate. Sometimes even lost for words of where to kind of go next or what to ask you. But what I would want to kind of ask you is a little bit multi-loaded, should we say? One, it's something you touched on previously when you reached out to, the therapist, things like that, because again, there's still a high number of black, not just boys, but men that are afraid to reach out to therapists, things like that, and actually communicate, because again, as men, we don't know how to communicate or speak or even break that mold whatsoever. And if you attach it to what happened as you said previously, things that happened in your adolescent years, reflect into your older years.
Yeah.
And even going back into that thing I said previously of, men don't cry, it's also the thing of, because you don't know how to express yourself, you pretty much divert your expression in different ways, whether it's anger, whether it's all sorts of different ways, whether it's being cold or stubborn, and it's negative, and you identify with it and you kind of say that's you. But the fact that you had an encouraging friend to say, reach out to a therapist, I would really want to, and I think it's important for the audience to kind of know what that looked like. One, from a race perspective of what color the therapist was, because at the same time, as much as, race isn't important, it also is, because I feel that, again, and I could be wrong, that I think it's imperative when you get to a therapist to also ask questions. Because bear in mind, with therapists, they're there to help and consult you. And two, if you feel or they feel they're not right, and they've got a different person they can direct you to, who you can, be yourself, your true, authentic self, and bring yourself out, for you to unlock and piece all these things together. I want to understand if you asked any questions or if they understood your culture, your experience, because again, you've also experienced being in an environment of, being raised around white people, going back into black, the culture change. So I think it's important for therapists to kind of understand these kind of basic things. So that's the first part, before I go into the next part. So
All right. So to answer that, in those days, therapy was still sort of quite new, psychotherapy, and I'm sort of like talking about the 80s, 90s, and even though therapy's been around for quite a while, but and most of psychotherapists in that time were white middle class, and so nowadays I would ask for if there was any sort of young person, particularly a young black person that wanted to reach out to a sort of a therapist, I would say that it'd be best to look to someone who comes from a sort of a similar background and culture, you know, like, and I'm not trying to bring a racial divide, but I just think they would be more suited in terms of identity and empathy, and would have a deeper understanding. And I mean, there's an organisation at the moment called it's BAATN, which is not sure what the actual letters stand for, but it's a psychotherapy organisation that is for black ethnic minorities, you know, and they have, you know, they can direct you to therapists who are of black origin, you know, who would be able to identify more and understand more. So in those days, when I reached out to a psychotherapist, you know, there wasn't, well, maybe I wasn't aware of any sort of black psychotherapist in those days, but from what I know historically, you know, there weren't many because it was still frowned upon, and especially by the sort of black communities, and I think that was due to a religious cultural background, because a lot of the black churches then frowned upon psychotherapy and psychology, because, you know, I think they came from the mentality, well, all you have to do is pray and it will go away, you know, but, you know, it's not that sort of thing, you know. And, you know, they'd lay hands on you, and, you know, and that's it. But whereas now, I think there's one guy that he started don't know his name, but he's called the Mind Camp. He's on Instagram, and he's a black pastor who started a sort of he started. Sorry, my wife's saying the time because yeah, and he started an organisation called the Mind Camp, where it's he does psychotherapy and art, and he's based in King's Cross. And I mean, I'll send his sort of details on to you guys, and he's really sort of opened up the, what you could say, the canyon of psychotherapy for black people. But yeah, so historically it was the domain of the white middle class, whereas now the new generation of sort of black people are moving more for psychotherapy and counselling. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered that question.
I think, as with all the questions, you've hit it out the park. You've been definitely answering them very thoroughly. As you mentioned there, the new generation, and I know we'll have to wrap up, so maybe this will be the final sort of question before we go into the fixed final ones, surprise ones that we always ask every guest. As you mentioned, the new generation, I know we spoke before about some of what you're doing to help the next generation and possibly future generations in your own way to be able to speak more and Could you maybe share with us how you came about with your idea for the book and what maybe you're hoping your book will do for the next generation, whether that's younger or older, but overall for the next generations?
Basically, could I need to go to the toilet. Could you?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Is
Is that right if I just go now and then you could?
Go. We'll do like a summary of what we've heard so far.
Just give me 1 minute.
Of course.
Sure.
So I guess we can do a bit of a summary of what we're thinking so far. I mean, like anyone listening will know, there's been a heck of a lot of ground covered today, and it's amazing stuff. At the core of it probably goes with why we titled this episode Owning Your Story, because there's multiple stories Tony could have told himself and he hasn't. He could have played a victim and he hasn't. He could have chosen not to be vulnerable and mask himself up and live a lie and all these sorts of things, and he hasn't. And it takes incredible courage, in my opinion, to be self-determining. I know he spoke about childhood shaping us a lot, but I feel like there's a lot of self-determination going on here. So a lot of active choices he's made that's led him to be the man he is and is still becoming, still trying to do so much more, you know. I don't know what your thoughts are at the moment.
I totally agree. For some of us, everyday life is a struggle against the things that happen in our heads. But it's amazing to kind of hear Tony's story and how he's his own hero and how he's a hero to all of us as well. And just because what you do find in here, especially in our community, especially with Black men, and again, it's just like, take for example, in the news quite recently, you've been hearing, even more now that Black people are going missing, when really and truly this has been happening for a long time. The same is also with Black men and suicide. And the trouble is, so the root stem, according to some research I found previously, was the fact that if you have a look at a man's kind of phases or life stages, shall we say, from adolescent, whether with family or whatever the situation is, after that you go into being with friends, you know how to speak, how to convey things, or you're just in an environment where you're with a lot of people. Now, once you get, I think it said past the age of about 40, you have less friends as a man, and you speak to less people. So essentially, because of that, because you don't have anyone to speak to, anyone to share your thoughts and emotions with, anyone to express, help and support you, like that's the breaking point where even as Black men, and again, you don't hear about it in the news because as Black people, it's put a lid on it kind of thing, get on with it, the same way it was when with everything from the Windrush, where whatever pain you're going through, just get on with it. So, and it's all about breaking that stigma to create a new story now, moving on, that irrespective of what's happened, that even as men, no matter what stage we are, no matter how old we are, it's all about creating impact and change to make sure everything from committing suicide to emotions and feelings, like, is a thing of the past. But that all starts with us talking to each other. So, and again, just hearing or just having insight on Tony's story and how, as Shai, you said, he's not playing the victim, or Tony's his own, superhero and our superhero.
Yeah. There's a lot for you to take out from what's been said. And Tony said during lockdown, a lot of us might be questioning our significance. And one of the lines we said when we started all this with Men Talk Ubuntu is, it is important that you are here, whoever you are, and you're listening. So it's, first of all, your existence is significant, and it's not an issue, at the very least, to us. So shameless plug, this is a community you can plug into and actually just speak to, and know that there's always someone there who you could speak to, or could point you in the direction of the resources you need, or that you can forward to someone who you feel maybe is sort of isolating themselves more, that sort of thing. Because we all experience loneliness, and I think a lot of us struggle with being vulnerable and, you know, vulnerability overall. So just know that, keep persevering, as the key word from this has said. And you might need to listen to this a couple times. I know I will. Yeah, I mean, we could definitely go for more, but what we'll transition into, firstly, Tony letting us know about the impact you're hoping that the book that you're designing, how that's going to help the next generation and other people. And then, yeah, we'll go into some of your responses for our quick fire questions, as it were. So yeah, let us know about the book first, please.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first book I've written is called A Sense of Place, and it was basically searching for my sense of place and belonging in life. And I think we all are searching for that sense of place and sense of belonging. And overall, I was just wanting people to find the objective of the book was for people to find, particularly us guys, is to find our true sense of place and belonging, and that, you know. And the second book I'm working on now, well, it's the third book really, because I wrote a little children's book, but the third book I'm working on is basically, well, what we've been talking about today is your sense of being, your sense of self-worth, and who you are, and you know, how we relate to each other, relate to ourselves, and how we can help each other as human beings, and what affects us also, our sense of being and our sense of self and who we are. You know, there's so many different things that affect us, you know. And you know, like I mentioned earlier, one of the chapters that I'm working on at the moment is our existence an issue to you, you know, and your existence as a person, is your existence an issue to your parents because of, you know, they might have turned around and said to you, oh, I wish you weren't born, and oh, you were just a 5-minute wonder. Is your existence an issue to your friends, your you know, is your existence an issue? And there's so many different aspects in the book that I'm trying to cover as a person, and I just wanted to reach out, and it's, you know, I want it to be where it's tackling our whole self and all our issues and how we can deal with them, you know, and how we can face them, you know. And it's very deep, but it's I'm trying to convey it in a layman's terms so that anyone can pick it up and look, oh, I want the person who reads the book to be enriched by it, and to be, and to feel that yes, life is worth living, and not give up, basically, you know, because, you know, we've got so much to contend with now, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, you know. And spiritually, sexually, you know, we've got all these things to contend with. And, you know, I think we just need to know that we're worth it and give ourselves a big hug, really, in terms, as well as hugging each other, but, you know, just to, you know, I know it sounds all sort of new agey, but it's not that. It's you know, it's basically, you know, all the issues that we're dealing with, tackling, you know. Yeah.
Now, well said, well said. And you mentioned a fantastic term earlier, which was bedrock. And that was one of the things that you found with the Mayhew residence, you know, solid ground that you could start really exploring life from. And so, yeah, I mean, even a hug can make you feel like you're on solid ground. I mean, it can make you feel like you're floating and everything, but it's that feeling of I'm safe, I'm accepted, and it's okay. It's okay to try and figure things out. So, no, well said, all well said. So I hope you're ready, Tony.
I'm ready. Yeah.
So we'll run into go.
Excellent,
Okay.
excellent. So, surprise questions. Brace yourself. I hope you got your seatbelt on. You know. So,
Yeah.
so the question I have for you is, what's the best thing about being black?
It might sound really strange, but that our DNA, scientists have proven that the black person, particularly as they classify as Negro, we're 100% DNA. Our DNA is 100% human. We're not, the black man, we are the true original human beings. And that if you study anthropology, all other humans derive from the black man. Yeah. And so, and also anthropology also proves that Jesus was a black man, because the Nazarenes, that sect, the Nazarenes, were black. So, yeah. And I just love being black because of our food, our culture, our physique, just our looks, the way we embrace life. Yeah, so I'm proud to be black. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Everything you said just resonated. I was like, yes, 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 yes. Oh, yes, is amazing, amazing. And looking at your goatee, you know, nice goatee you've got there, and you know, I'm
Right, thank you.
just sat here thinking that, you know, who taught you how to shave?
It was Mr. Mayu. Yeah, Mr. Mayu taught me to shave, but he used to dry shave, so he didn't use any water or anything like that. He just used to use the blade. Yeah,
That's a tough man.
yeah, he was. But I use shaving cream and, you know, or face wash and use a blade. You know, well, a shaving stick. Yeah. So yeah.
You're a braver man than me. I'm not messing with the blade. Those bumps ain't coming near me. I might just need to learn. Who knows? All right. Well, Tony, I mean, if you're a student of anthropology and all these other things, you're definitely a student of life. Let me ask you in that case, what book or resource do you hope people still use 100 years from now?
The Bible. You know, yeah, the Bible. But as long as they read it in its historical and cultural context, because I think history has proven that you need to know your history, and because a lot of things can be taken out of context, and because things are taken out of context, it can lead to a lot of misinterpretation. And so, yeah, the Bible, but as well as the books that I've written, I hope that, yeah, but yeah.
You're placing them in very high company. No.
Yeah, but there's a list of, there's a whole list of books, really, you know, like there've been some great authors down, you know, like James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, you know, Alice Walker, you know, Martin Luther King Jr., even Barack Obama. You know, he's, I don't know if you've read any of his books. I mean, especially the new one out, Promised Land, and he puts a lot of things into, you know, perspective. Yeah, so
That's beautiful. Like say, I mean, obviously you went with the Bible initially, and I think that ties to a key part of your life, and you know, so that's very understandable, and you've clearly shown you're still engaged with a lot of other. Finally, for me, what do you wish more men talked about?
their emotional and mental feelings, particularly black men, yeah, and how they're feeling deep down, and even their sexual feelings as well, you know, regardless of where they're coming from. Yeah. So, but particularly mental and emotionally, just to really, I think we just need to really connect and talk more about those things. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. And I think there's, I think we definitely need to, you know, do this again. The key takeaways for me, and I hope, you know, it's the same key takeaways for our listeners as well, is to, so first of all, it's a thing of everybody has trauma. Everybody has experienced things that has an effect even without you unconsciously knowing. But the key thing is, you know, stepping into that vulnerability of feelings and emotion is what you've conveyed to us, is, you know, so extremely important to us. And hearing what you said today is everything from, you know, feeling those emotions is one, naming it, and then so yeah, feeling it, and then on top of that, you know, don't name it to shame it, but feel it to heal it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it makes you more vulnerable. And again, it's destigmatizing vulnerability even as men, is that vulnerability doesn't make you weak. If anything, it gives you strength. And in terms of my own personal growth, and as you know, Shaiminda said, ever since last year, my vulnerability and my growth has strengthened me in ways that I never thought it would. And, you know, if whoever's listening, you don't feel that you are ready to take that step to speak to a therapist, it's important to speak to people you know that will create that safe and open space environment for you to, one, be okay, to know that it's okay not to be okay, but on top of that, to share and speak about all these things and not be judged or feel a certain kind of way to close up, essentially. And more importantly, as Black men, we're not alone. And, you know, it's imperative for all of us to just continue to show that, not just to each other, but also to connect and bring and pull all men so we can rebuild our foundation within the community and contribute more to the world as well, and just grow and change. Because again, mental health is mental health is attached to such things as race, feelings, relationships, everything, and it all starts by all of us, talking about it.
Yeah.
Tony, it's been delightful having this conversation with you. It is good and important that you are here. And they do say a picture can paint 1,000 words, but I think a conversation can be the difference between life and death. And I'm so glad you're encouraging people to have more of these conversations and trying to leave your mark in a positive way and use your experiences in a positive way. I can only imagine how amazing you are as a father, despite the challenges, and because you're open about the challenges. It's going to be fantastic to meet you in person at some point, when we're allowed.
Yeah.
I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, because for me, it's been outstanding. And also, I had a quick look. The BAATN is the Black, African, and Asian Therapy Network, which
That's
shows,
right.
yeah. So that's an amazing resource to share. Such a giving guest that we've had today. You've shared so much information and so much of your story that hopefully other people will get courage and inspiration from. I just commend you for that. And as we said before, we're just really proud of you, man.
Thank you. And it's been a real pleasure, an absolute pleasure. And discovering this mental and Ubuntu has been like discovering gold. And I hope other people will find that too as well. Yeah. So thank you so much. And it's great to put a name to the faces, and yeah. Thanks, Ray, and thanks, Shai. Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, and I want to get one of those t-shirts. Is it the mental t-shirt? Yeah. So
coming soon. We're working on that right now. Watch this space.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for being a great member of the community, because you definitely are now, whether you like it or not. All right.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed creating.
Don't forget to follow, like, share, and connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our latest episode and listen to any you missed. And tune in next episode.
Take care.